So this is a conversation a couple of hours after we finished talking with Amber about Amber 9.
Yes. Yes.
Anything we should be talking about before we?
No, not before.
And as usual, I don't have a particular choreography in mind. I've got some things in mind that I think might be interesting. But if you've got something in mind that might be interesting, we should probably start.
I don't have anything specific. I in terms of what I thought interesting, I thought maybe Beep 4 might be interesting. The iPad seeing Beep. Yeah, that would be the one I think that I'd want to talk about. But
all right, let's go for that.
And at the moment
actually,
of
wait.
the beep, I was seeing the pink case.
Actually, I lied. It wasn't Beep 4 that I was interested in. I was thinking of Beep 3. Seeing the noodles and the niece beep.
Okay. You do number 3.
Okay. Okay, so number 3, I had just said the word niece, and that was still kind of like it was at the end of the word niece. Like that was it.
What's the word? I can't hear the
niece.
Word.
Niece.
Niece, like a nephew and niece.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was talking to my dad, and my eyes were aimed at him, and I was seeing him, but I was also eating ramen, and I was like picking it up with chopsticks, and it was just coming into this is all at the moment of the beat, sorry, I didn't make that clear, but this is all, this was just coming into my vision, I guess I had just lifted it high enough that it was just coming into my vision, and it was like the ramen noodles were at the bottom right field of my vision. They were like coming into this image of my dad, and the noodles were starting to come in, and they only was in the bottom right. And that was it. That was the entire moment of the beep right there.
So I'm not sure that I understand the niece portion of this. So okay. Are there 2 aspects of my experience? There's the visual thing and the saying of niece?
Yes. Like, I just finished saying niece, and it was kind of, that was ending, and then the noodles and all that stuff was beginning.
So niece is still present to you, even though in the physical world, the utterance of it is done like half a second or a quarter of a second or a second or something before? Yeah. Okay. And you had said that. And yet it's still somehow present in your experience. Yeah, it was the idea of niece, because I was describing, this is context, but I was describing, we were watching The Office, and he wanted to know why they named Jim and Pam have a daughter, and they named the daughter Cece, and he wanted to know why. And I was saying because it was named after Jenna Fisher's niece. And then, so the idea of niece, that was the main idea of the whole thing. So that was still the idea of niece, and the idea of the word niece was still there. Like, and then, that was the saying part. And is it the word niece that's there, or is it the sentence they named it because it's Jennifer's niece? No, it was the word niece. It wasn't the rest of the sentence. It wasn't about Jenna Fisher. It wasn't about CC. It wasn't about the characters. It was about niece. So like your experience at this moment is of one word. Yes. That word niece. Yes. Not the word at the end of the sentence. It happened to be the word at the sentence, but your experience is not of the end of a sentence. It is of niece. Okay. And that is as a word, not, I'm gathering, that is a word. Yes. Not the concept of niece as being, my sister's daughter or whatever. Yeah. Or not even the fact that it was the name. That's how the name was related. Nothing like that. It was just the word niece. The word niece. Yeah. As a I don't want to say meaningless, but is it like a meaningless, like this is a word niece, but the semantics of it, the meaning of it, the context of it is not present to me anymore, just the word?
Yeah, it's like the definition, the meaning, all of that stuff. It was just niece. It was like an objective niece, I guess. Yeah.
Like an abstracted away word. This is the
Yes.
word. The word
Can
niece.
you pause the video? So I was wondering, in the moment when you said that you kind of hesitated to use the word meaningless to ask her about the word being present, what sort of the pitfalls behind that, or where's that hesitation for you coming from?
I would have rather have heard her say this word had no meaning. But I think that's a complicated thing for somebody to say, somebody who hasn't spent 20 years trying to sort through this stuff. And so what I would have liked to have done would have been to have created a situation where she could have examined it and come up on her own by saying, well, this word had no meaning for me. This was just a bare word. But I couldn't figure out in the millisecond that you got to make up your mind about what you're going to say. Yep. I didn't have anything better to say about that. So I ended up saying, well, I don't want to say meaningless, but I said meaningless anyway. As a way of undermining myself so she didn't feel like she had to go there. But still one could argue that I led her in that direction. Mm-hmm. I would argue that myself. But it wasn't my favorite question, but it was the best I could do under the time constraints of an interview.
Right. I mostly asked because I think that came up again at another point today. I'm forgetting where, but I feel like we saw a sample at some point today where it was similar, where the question was sort of like, is this the saying of a word and does it really matter? Or I think it was the reading beep, right? The Google Drive beep where, I was interested in knowing, we were interested in figuring out whether this is like a reading with comprehension or just words present without meaning or something.
We had a number of examples today where we're teasing apart the physical actuality and what lies behind it was what we were about, what we spent a lot of time today doing. And this I think was one example of that.
Yeah. And it's sort of just as a comment of the process, it's very challenging to do that because I feel like we don't really have great differentiated words to be clear about, well, like when we say like, I'm seeing this thing in the real world, but then in my experience, there's that, it's hard to separate, to talk about those things in neat ways.
I agree with that. And even if there were a technical term, I would be reluctant to use it because then I would like to be talking about Amber's experience as she grasps her experience, not as she wants to filter it through some fancy word that I would tell her she's got to use. Onward?
Yep.
So I think this might be sort of the end of the conversation about the word niece. And I felt pretty confident that I had understood what she was saying, that this was about the word niece was there. It didn't have much semantic meaning. It had enough semantic meaning to be recognized as a word. This is not just an utterance of some gibberish kind of thing that she recognizes, but it doesn't have any nomological net or any network with the office or the CC or whoever. It was sort of a bare word. But all of the semantic hooks or tendrils or connections or whatever are gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm seeing my father, and that's in my experience.
Yeah.
And I see ramen come into my visual field.
Yeah, like as part of... like almost as if that was starting to interrupt. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical than it is really experiential. But it was coming in, like that's how I would describe it because it wasn't here. It was just starting to kind of come in.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or Amber, what is it that what do you see?
I see, okay, so I see like, if I had to like paint a picture, I see my dad, right? Like he's sitting there, and then I see like noodles in like the bottom right of my visual experience. Like of my visual, yeah. My visual.
And noodles on chopsticks or just noodles?
Just noodles. But I understand them to be lifted.
So let me make a comment. So the question, what exactly do you see, is a good, that you asked, I think is a good question. If we're convinced that what we're interested in is the seeing. I wasn't yet interested in the seeing. I was more interested in her saying interrupted. And so as we now know from the rest of the 15 minutes that we spent talking about this, we were trying to sort through whether the interruption was a part of her experience. And the way she said interruption.
I see like noodles in like the bottom right of.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's before that. Okay. And then I'm seeing my father,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in my experience.
Yeah.
And I see ramen come into my visual field.
Yeah, like as part of, like almost as if that was starting to interrupt. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical than it is really experiential.
So for whatever reason, that has hooked my interest. And there's a number of reasons that I could explain why I think it's hooked my interest. One is whatever a person says first about an experience is often an important thing. If we can grasp everything that the person says on the first go around, there's something to be said for that. And so interruption came for that. And then interruption had some power, and then some denial or backtracking or something about it. Oh, that's just metaphor or whatever. It didn't look like metaphor. Didn't look like metaphor on the way in. Then it became metaphor on the way out. And so that has my interest peaked.
And I think that's actually where I was curious about where the conversation of the figure ground came from, because I felt I was somewhat surprised by that line of questioning when we got to it. Mostly because I think it felt to me as it felt like an overemphasis of interruption, or I was afraid that we were leading down, well, because things entering your field, then you have to be focusing your attention on the ramen and not on your dad, and you're switching. And that's where I hadn't picked up on that throughout the conversation up until those questions were starting to be asked. And that's really why I wanted to review the video, was just to kind of see how we got there.
Well, let's watch it one more time.
Part of, like almost as if that was starting to interrupt. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical than it is really interrupt. Like as
I see ramen come into my visual field.
Yeah, like as part of, like almost as if that was starting to interrupt. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical than it is really experiential. But
you know what I think about retrospection, but what I can tell you right now is that when she says interrupt, she doesn't say it like she meant it as a metaphor. She says interrupt with a sort of a separation of each syllable, which to my ear means I mean this. It's not just a metaphor. I'm not just throwing it out like but the rest of her metaphors is going to be sort of smoothly said. But she says interrupt. She means something behind it, I think, to my aesthetic. See ramen come into my visual field.
Yeah, like as part of, like almost as if that was starting to interrupt. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical than it is really experiential. But it was coming in, like that's how I would describe it because it wasn't here, it was just starting to kind of come in.
So you have doubts about that?
Yeah, I mean, to my ear, she's been pretty careful throughout the majority of her sampling, but especially on this day, I felt like she was, pretty clear saying, this is in my experience and this is context. And she does pause around, there is some air around her, that use of the word interrupt. And I think maybe I'm reacting to it. I remember even in the moment kind of going, well, I'm not going to take her words too seriously at this point, right? I think we're dancing around trying to figure out how to describe this. And so I chopped it up as she's saying, she's emphatically saying, interrupt's not really a great word for it. And so I thought I bought it.
So what I would say about that is, if you got that kind of a thought process, don't buy it. Which doesn't mean believe it. So I'm not saying you should believe her that interrupt meant something. What you should do is to file it away as saying, well, there might be something interesting here. Might not be something interesting here. I don't know. My antennae wake up and say, well, that was interesting. She said something that I didn't understand. I'm going to have to figure that out somewhere down the road. And so it's not a battle between, yes, that's what it means, or no, it's not what it means.
Right.
The battle is between, do I want to try to figure out what that means sooner or later? Doesn't necessarily have to be sooner. There's a lot of different paths that'll lead to Rome, I think it's a risky thing to believe that you understand something prematurely. Said another way, what I think is DES is not about interpretation.
Right.
DES is about putting somebody into a position where they can be unambiguous. If there is an ambiguity, we don't want to figure out which side of that ambiguity we should come down on. If there's an ambiguity, we want to get Amber to tell us
right
which side to come down on.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical.
And I see ramen come into my visual field.
Yeah, like as part of, like almost as if that was starting to interrupt. I don't know why. I mean, that's more metaphorical than it is really experiential. But it was coming in, like that's how I would describe it because it wasn't here, it was just starting to kind of come in.
So the fact of the matter is, I didn't understand what she said in the last part. She wasn't here and it wasn't there. It was just starting to come in. I didn't understand that when she said it in the first place. I still don't understand what meant by that. What I took her to be trying to say was something about, well, I said interrupt. It wasn't really interrupt. It wasn't here. It wasn't there. I didn't understand any of it. Which, to my way of looking at it, is, well, I should be interested in that.
Mm. And I mean, I think I felt a similar, or actually maybe not similar, but I felt confused at this point going, I was understanding her to be saying there's something visual about this, right? I'm seeing this, I'm seeing something. And that's why I'd asked the question of, well, what do you see? Because I was I felt like I had an understanding of different parts where she's saying, I'm seeing the ramen and I'm seeing my dad, but it was unclear to me as to like, what is it that we're talking about here, right? And why I asked the question of, well, what is it that you see?
Well, I don't think that was a bad question. It wasn't. what it caused me to do is to file away the interruption issue. So I was going to have to figure that out later on. But that often happens. Very often the details are 5 minutes later before I get around to asking them.
And that's kind of where, at least from my mind, it was, again, sort of in the spirit of these conversations, in my mind, I'm just trying to practice, okay, what's the phenomena here, right? Like, what's the thing I can kind of hold on to? And the only meaningful thing that I know of so far is she's seeing something, but I don't quite know what she's seeing. And so I thought, well, let me figure out that first. And maybe, once we talk about that, then I'll, that'll lead the discussion to wherever it's going to go.
So it's going to come up later on, I think, in this interview, if I'm not mistaken. But any kind of interview, and clinical interviews and whatever, is always something of a battle between normalizing something, making it less strange than it is, and hyper exaggerating something, making it more strange than it is. Yeah. And I think there was a time when I think we're going to get to it later on, where I had the reaction, well, Cody's making this less strange than it was. It wasn't this part here. It was later on. But Cody's making it.
I think there was a, I mean, I think I asked the question that was sort of on a different tack than where you were heading.
It was about the chopstick and.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
But we'll see that when we get there. And the advantage of DES is, I think, that we don't have to do that. We don't have to make something strange, and we don't have to make something unstrange. We can wait, and we say, I don't know whether this is strange or not. Let's see. Let's find out whether it's strange, because we can get more information. The beauty of the iterative procedure is that we're going to get more information on a brand new topic. So this is her 9th sampling day or whatever, and we had some examples of where she saw the world not the way the world is. I guess we got one coming up there. She doesn't see the chopstick, that even though that's presented for her. And the reason that we can be confident about that is that we've seen examples of that previously. Right. So we have differentiated that with her. Mm-hmm. And so I think we can be, I think we have a baseline of what she means when she says certain kinds of things.
Yeah.
Onward?
Yep. Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Yeah. Or Amber, what is it that, what do you see?
I see, okay, so I see, like, if I had to, like, paint a picture, I see my dad, right? Like, he's sitting there. And then I see like noodles in like the bottom right of my visual experience.
To my way of watching, this is the second time she's laughed about these noodles. There's nothing funny about noodles coming up. Mm-hmm. And so there's something behind.
Okay, so I see, like, if I had to, like, paint a picture, I see my dad, right? Like, he's sitting there, and then I see, like, noodles in, like...
There's something interesting there. This is not just telling you what she sees. If she's telling you something she sees, she would say, well, I see the noodles, and they're over here, and whatever.
Right.
Declaratively, whatever. And so there's something behind it. I don't know what it is yet. I know that I'm interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom right of my visual experience. Like, my visual, yeah. My visual.
And noodles on chopsticks, or just noodles?
Just noodles. But I understand them to be lifted by chopsticks, because they're, like, in the air. That makes sense.
So so that's where, this is another place where the figure ground comes, because that's a pretty strange way of speaking. if she's just saying, well, I see a noodles with chopsticks, you wouldn't say I see suspended in air. You wouldn't say that. You would say I see a chopstick and I see noodles on a chopstick. So I'm not interpreting it. What I am, I think, is reacting to, well, this is a strange way of talking about it.
Right.
This is not just a straightforward description of something that she sees. To my ear, maybe,
right.
you know, maybe this is the way she talks about it. But it's got my interest going.
Mm-hmm. I also remember in the moment, again, it's all retrospection, but I was very much on the same page, though. I thought that's a strange, just her reaction, just noodles was a weird way of saying it at the outset. And so I was glad you asked that question, because I'm thinking something is strange about this.
The beauty of DES, I think, is that if your heart is pure, I think, sort of, or more or less pure, it doesn't have to be exactly pure, but if it's pretty pure, and you're curious about something, you don't understand something, you can ask, well, I don't understand something, I'd like to know that. And you can be totally honest about that, in the sense that, well, you said it this way, that seemed a little strange to me. As long as, and by your heart is pure, as long as you don't mean that as a criticism of Amber. This is Cody's, or in my case, Russ's way of, I'm trying to understand what Amber has said. Amber has said something that's interested me. I'm going to ask her about it. Not to trap her. That's what I guess I feel like gives me the right to ask the question.
Trap her in the sense of, well, like, tell me what you're thinking, or you must be saying this to yourself in that kind of a manner.
I've got a theory, and I want you to validate my theory.
Yeah.
It's not that. That, I think, is a trap. It's a trap that psychology falls in a lot, but it is a trap. And in my, I think, pretty genuine, I would like to know what Amber's experience is like, period. Mm-hmm. And there's no theory that says, I got a chopstick theory, or I got a visual experience theory, or I've got an interruption theory, or I've got a whatever. Or I've got a laughter behind when you talk about things, or a weird way to talk about things, or whatever. I don't have a theory about that. I've got ears that I've been working at trying to pay attention to for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to refine what I've heard.
Sort of like a childlike curiosity, right? No, right? Yeah. Kind of a disattachment from any sort of, like any theories, any goals, anything. Just like, oh, that's interesting, and what's that about? And
I think that's right. And noodles on chopsticks, or just noodles?
Just noodles. But I understand them to be lifted by chopsticks, because they're like in the air. If that makes sense.
So if you watch me react to that, I think you'll see, like, what we call a childlike, well, what the heck?
Mm-hmm.
And noodles on chopsticks, or just noodles?
Just noodles. But I understand them to be lifted by chopsticks, because they're like in the air. If that makes sense.
So what I'm trying to understand here, I suppose I know what I'm thinking about, or how I'm feeling about that. To me, that looks like, what did she just say? Did I hear did she mean what I took her to mean, or whatever? Mm-hmm. Kind of do. Is the noodles are on chopsticks. I understand that.
Yeah.
And do you see the noodles with the chopsticks abstracted away, I guess? So
yeah. Almost, yeah.
Or is it that the noodles are positioned in a way, right? Because if you have noodles on chopsticks, not saying that's to conform to reality, but it's like, right, like the noodles are on top of the sticks when you're pulling them up.
So that's the place that I was saying, talking about a little bit of what I'm thinking about. Cody is normalizing this behavior more than I would have, I guess, whatever it is.
I mean, and I think, I mean, this is kind of both a comment and a question, but I think in the moment too, I'm kind of thinking, I am pretty bought into saying, I think this is right, I'm like, it's a genuine yes. I don't think that's I've been talked into and I'm going to just agree to go along kind of a thing, right? Like this is you got it, Russ. Like this isn't I'm not seeing the chopsticks. The chopsticks aren't there, right? And I kind of thought, well, if I drag my feet on this, if I ask a bad question here, I don't think I'm going to talk her out of that either.
So I'm not a mind reader, so I don't know what you were thinking about.
Right, and I don't really remember either, too.
So. And so if you meant that question as a drag my feet question, to give her the option to reaffirm, yes, this is a sort of a abstracted way, as I called it, for perception, then that would be fine. I think that would be great. If you were trying to give her an out to get her to make life easy for her, well, I just didn't see the chopstick, then I didn't think that was a good question.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I am not in a position to judge whether that was a good question. I worried about it. I can tell you that. At the time, I was worried that Cody was trying to let her off, but that doesn't mean that he was. And
I mean, I guess because that's why the question, I guess, or the thing that I'm just thinking about now is, we've spent time talking about how experience is hard to get, right? The more you talk about something, right, the more you muddy the waters and stuff. But at the same time, if someone's being pretty clear about experience, pretty clear about phenomena, I don't think you can really talk them out of it either. I don't know what your thought. I mean, I'm sure you can, but there's a part of me that feels like the phenomena is pretty robust. You can kind of push in the other direction, and if it was really there, they'll pull you again and say, no, it's not quite what I meant.
I think in the big picture I agree with you. In some details I might not agree with you, because I think if we watched the iPad beep, we would see some places where we talked her into and out of whether she was seeing a wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
that's fair.
And so I think it depends on how fine the details are. And I think it depends a lot on not only how fine the details are, but how well we understand what we're talking about, whether we have a language for talking about it. Which in the iPad situation we didn't have.
Yeah. It probably strikes me too that it depends on presuppositions as well, right? Like if you're asking a question, dragging your feet in the direction of something that directly conforms with someone's presuppositions, I mean, that's pretty dangerous ground to try to cross.
Yeah. But that's valuable sometimes. You can get somebody to contradict their own presuppositions. That's good.
Mm.
But in the iPad beep, I think that was difficult because, as you pointed out a little bit ago, we don't have a good word, don't have a good way of talking about the difference between seeing the real world and seeing an image, and seeing a distortion of the real world. What I ended up calling wrong. I didn't particularly like that word, but it was,
yeah, that's where I think it was that beat where I'm like, oh, there's a lot going on here. And there's like three separate kind of differentiations we're trying to make, but it's all, we use the word C for all of them, right? Or, are you seeing, but are you seeing X? Are you seeing Y? Are you seeing Z? And I thought, oh, this is getting, this is messy.
On that topic of wrong, before we come back to here, I sometimes use creative to try to put a positive spin on wrong. So wrong and creative mean the same thing from my point of view, but wrong has a little bit of a two negatives deal and creative has a little bit of a two positive deal. But we don't have a neutral word that means distorted, I don't think.
Altered. But even then, again, like it's not necessarily
Altered
positive, not neutral.
Altered isn't quite right either. All right, well, back to this beep.
Yep.
Oh, I understand. No, realistically, if you were to take a picture,
right,
chopsticks would have been in it.
So in the real photons coming from the chopstick noodle thing, you're getting photons coming from the chopsticks, but you're not getting experience coming from the chopsticks. You're getting experience coming from the noodles. Is that right?
Yes.
And then I'm interested in, so the interviewing is an interesting skill. I wasn't too happy with my photons. I wasn't sure that she understood what I meant by photons coming from the chopsticks. I think I eventually came to believe that she understood what I meant. But while I was asking that, while I was in the throes of asking that question, I'm thinking, I'm not sure she knows what the heck I'm talking about. Photons coming from chopsticks, whatever. First photons don't come from chopsticks.
It's one of those things that in doing this, I'm like we talked about a little while ago. I'm not in support of saying that we need to develop whole new language words and create a whole other sort of dictionary for all this stuff. But it's challenging to be clear about making these differentiations because it's the same word used in multiple contexts, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I will say in defense of the process, it is an interesting thing to do because I do think we are trying to describe. I should speak for myself. I suppose it's true for you too, but I am trying to describe and trying to help Amber describe her experience the way her experience actually was, using the words that we've got at our disposal, which are not perfect.
Right. And
her words aren't perfect, and neither are mine. And
well, I think actually it's what's very interesting about that is, I think, again, whether we keep this in the main video or not, we'll see. But I think a lot of psychologists know this in their heart, but don't take that seriously, right? In terms of these distinctions are the ones that really matter and they're important to make. It's really, you can't make this without a conversation, a questionnaire. You can't hope to capture all of this in a questionnaire, or at least I think you're going to do a pretty poor job of that through a questionnaire.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible in a questionnaire.
Yeah.
But you're not getting experience coming from the chopsticks. You're getting experience coming from the noodles. Is that right?
Yes.
And then I'm interested in this disturbance thing, which is sort of metaphor or semi-metaphor, and I can't even remember whether that was exactly the right word. But I'm gathering that it's not just I see the noodles entering, but there's something about this enter that is not just the appearance of the ramen.
Yeah.
Is that right?
There's something about it. It's like disrupting this thing that I'm looking at.
And is that this? So I would say about my question that what I'm trying to say in that question is I want to corral us back to talking about what I found of interest. I don't want to pollute the waters any more than I do that I have to. So I'm just sort of pressing around in this area, trying to get us back there without pushing in any direction. And I do that by acting stupid, and being stupid. I think being stupid and acting stupid. Maybe stupid isn't exactly the right word, but But I think what I see myself doing in this is saying, I don't know what I'm talking about here, Amber. I have an interest in what happened, what you said. I don't remember exactly what you said. I don't want to tell you what I think you said. I don't really know anything about what's going on here, but I want us to talk about that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
That is what I'm trying to convey. And I guess you or anybody else can judge whether I'm successful at that. But the object is to turn the conversation back to what she called interruption without muddying the water with what I would say.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I'm interested in this disturbance thing, which is sort of metaphor or semi-metaphor, and I can't even remember whether that was exactly the right word, but I'm gathering that it's not just I see the noodles entering, but there's something about this enter that is not just the appearance of the ramen.
Yeah.
Is that right?
There's something about it. It's like disrupting this thing that I'm looking at.
And to my ear, I use disturb. Her original word was interrupt. I use disturb. She uses disrupt, which is a new word, which to my ear, when somebody creates their own synonym for what we were talking about before, that is, to my way of thinking, evidence that we're on the right track. We're heading towards something. She called it interrupt. I called it disturb. She says disrupt. If she had said something like, well, I said interrupt, but it wasn't really interrupt, I would have said, well, I didn't understand it, then let's move on. But that isn't what she said. She says, I'm trying to find a new word here to describe this phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Could you also interpret that as she's not talking about phenomena because she's changing what it is that she's saying? First she's right. I mean, is that another likelihood, another probability?
It's possible, and I think if you're worried about that, then you can track down that possibility. It isn't a possibility that would appeal to me because it seems to me that from interrupt to disturb to disrupt seems like a refinement rather than a retreat.
And it's not like a ping-ponging, right? Like, oh, I'm hearing this, so I'm not actually hearing it. I'm singing to myself. Well, I'm not singing to myself. I'm
right,
like where it's going all over the place, where there's kind of no through line through that. This has a through line.
I said interrupt originally, and now I'm going to give you probably what Webster would say is a synonym, disrupt. So I'm taking I'm taking Amber to try to be saying something that what I'm understanding is that there is something about what happened at the moment of the beep that is in the general ballpark of interrupt, disrupt. What that is yet, I don't have any idea. Mm-hmm. But I'm giving Amber enough credit for having access to something that she's choosing. Oh, the first word went in this direction, and the next word is going and sort of in the same direction, but from a slightly different perspective. She's got something that she's got something to say about this. It seems to me. Maybe I'll change my mind if she changes her words. Right. I'm going to change my mind. At this moment,
I buy that though. I at least I buy that in terms of, and in differentiation of well, people change the words they use all the time, right? But I can understand at least that difference now.
And is that disrupting experience? Like I feel a disruption?
What did I write down? No, I didn't. No, I wouldn't. No, I didn't feel a disruption. It was a disruption, but I didn't experience it, I guess, if that makes sense.
You got a reaction to that?
I'm just confused. I really don't know I don't know what we're talking about when she says disrupt. At this point now I'm thinking, it's not clear to me, is this part of experience or is this context? Or actually, it's not a categorical thing in that way. It's more like how close to, if this is her experience at the moment of the beep, where is disrupt along this thing? Is it all the way out here? Is it right in the center, right here? It's super salient. It's a really big part of it. Is it, that's kind of where I'm struggling to figure out where we are in that.
So I'm struggling too. So we're going to rewind this and we're going to listen to my question, because my guess is that she doesn't understand my question exactly. She interprets my question not in the way that I meant it, I think, which is part of the interesting part of what makes interviewing an interesting deal, I think, is that the task is always to figure out what a guy understands when you're talking. When I'm talking, how does a guy get that? And I don't think I think the second half of her answer answers the question that I was asking. And the first half of her answer answers a question which is not the question that I intended. I think she hears my question as something like a meta-analytic question. Do I have she understands my question.
Yeah, and
do I have a meta-analytic view of this disruption, which is not what I meant. That's what she understood.
Right.
And she says, no, I didn't have that. It was just disruptive.
Yeah, I think that's what it was too, is she, I think, kind of globbed onto, she's like, well, I'm not feeling disrupted.
Right.
And in some way I'm like, okay, I mean, okay. But then when she goes into, but my vision is disrupted. I thought, okay, we didn't get anywhere, because I'm like, okay, at least I can buy that this wasn't a, for lack of a better word, cognitive, analytical, like meta-awareness type thing. But that wasn't really what I was kind of too like, oh, well, that's not really what I thought direction I wanted to head.
You can see me take a deep breath here when I'm trying to figure out what you meant there.
But it's hard too, I think, because again, I think the hard thing about this word disrupt is, and I think I asked this question, which I wasn't thrilled about, but I think it was difficult of like, it's a fact of reality that like, well, yeah, if something's entering your field of plane, right, you could say, well, my vision's being disrupted by this thing entering my visual field. And disrupt can also mean somehow, right, like my seeing is disrupted. There's something about my seeing that it's important to note that this disruption was present.
So I gotta figure out what you meant about that. So if I scratch my ear, you wouldn't say, oh, Cody wouldn't say Cody's visual field was disrupted because Russ's hand came into the picture. I don't think. You wouldn't say, oh, look, I'm disrupted.
No.
So disrupting is a pretty strong word. So it's not, if your focus shifts around or whatever and you're adjusting you wouldn't say it was disrupted. I don't think. She means something more than something new is entering my visual field. I think interviewing is always something like a comparison with what you would naturally say in a slightly different, if the situation were different. So if there were no real disruption, if all there was I could see the ramen come into my field, then she would say something like, well, I was seeing my dad and then I was seeing some ramen enter from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the natural way to describe that. Or she could say, I was seeing my dad, and then I could feel my attention shift from my dad to the ramen, or I was lost interest in my dad, and now I was interested in the ramen. Most of the time, people just say, they see my dad, and then later, I see the ramen, nothing in between.
I buy that, but I also then become a little bit hesitant to say, it makes too much sense for me to say, yeah, that, I don't know the real probability, but I think, well, what if this is Amber's way of talking about, if she's pulling the ramen and it's coming up, if she's pulling it up like this, and so it's like there's this mass of noodles that's coming up right here.
It's not a matter of figuring things out from probabilities. It's a matter of Amber leans in this direction and I lean in this direction with her. And then I ask her what she means by that. It's not trying to figure it out. It's trying to help Amber tell me. That's the difference, I think. I never try to figure something out, I don't think. I try to help Amber get into a position where she can tell me so I don't have to figure it out.
That makes sense. I think that framing of that makes sense. And my question wasn't so much about an interpretive question. It was more I agree with you that I would, if you're just asking me what I would expect to see, I would imagine her saying something like you said, oh, my attention, I'm eating ramen and I was looking at my dad and now I'm looking at the ramen, now I'm shifting my vision to this, right? And like that would be like, okay, I'm not going to really bat an eye about that. But I don't necessarily want to then assume, well, because Amber's saying this in a different way, then again, imposing my sort of theory, right? Like, oh, she's not following the typical path of visual stuff. So I have to, and that's just where I was like, I'm not quite sure what to do about this.
So that would be to figure it out, but I don't think you want to figure it out.
Right.
Just help me understand, Amber.
But I can see that the important dispositional change in that, right? Where, yeah, my role here is not to interpret that. My role is not to explain that or to, but it's just, I'm noting, well, that's an interesting way of saying it. And I ought to try and figure out, help Amber figure out, or help us figure out collectively here. Well, what's
my role, as I see it, is to help Amber put into words things which she has never had to put into words, which I spent a lifetime trying to put into words, and to help her describe it in a way that I can understand, that is faithful to her experience, and that I can understand it well enough that I can put into words that the outside world would believe. So I don't want to force Amber to have to put it into external words. That's way too hard for her. I think that's my job. My job is to be the midwife or the translator or I don't know exactly what the word is, but if she uses a strange locution, then I want to see whether there's something behind it. And if she speaks plainly, then I would want to see whether that means that things were plain. And I don't think there's right or wrong answers to this. I think it's I'm trying to help Amber. I'm trying to help us put Amber's experience into high fidelity. And the reason for that is because it's genuinely interesting to me. I think what we're talking about Amber's experience is totally interesting. We've come up with understanding that amber distorts reality. I don't like that word either. Gets reality wrong. Don't like that word. Is creative. I don't like that word either. I haven't figured out exactly what to say, but that seems to happen pretty often for amber. Not that amber's the Lone Ranger in that department, but it's fairly unusual, and I think that's interesting. I think it's totally interesting, and it's no doubt part of what makes amber amber, and my interest is no doubt what makes me me, and she said it pretty well at the end of today when she said, I can't imagine ever saying, no, I don't want to do this again. Something to that effect. But I think that's right. And I can say the same thing. I can't imagine ever wanting not to do it again. Because what could be more interesting than that? So we've been at this for pretty much an hour, I think, and you had a meeting that you had to go to?
I'm free until 6:30, but yeah, I have about 9 minutes left here.
Okay. And did we get to what you thought might be interesting about this beat?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly figuring out, just sort of revisiting it to figure out where that hang up was, our 15 minutes of trying to figure out disruption, whatever the word was. But that's where I was, but I think it was buried back actually when we first talked about, right, like when she first used that word disrupted, and she said, well, I mean that metaphorically, right, or whatever. That was where I could see from that where the interest came from, right? I could see at least where the seeds were planted. In the moment, in the interview, I just was kind of like, whoa, where'd that come from? Where's this coming from?
Well, shall we listen to a few more minutes and we can...
Sure, yeah.
And is that disrupting experience? Like I feel a disruption?
What did I write down? No, I didn't. No.
So when I hear that again, that I think I agree with my previous interpretation that she takes my asking as a really a meta-analytical question.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't. No, I didn't feel a disruption. It was a disruption, but I didn't experience it, I guess, if that makes sense.
So it would be possible, I can imagine, it would be possible I'm seeing my dad, and then for whatever reason and he's been the figure of my visual world.
Right.
And for whatever reason, I'm going to make the ramen the figure of the next figure in my experiential world.
Right.
And so in this perceptual space, you have to sort of destroy the old figure to make a new figure. Right? That's the way figure ground works, we think.
Uh-huh.
But most of the time that doesn't happen. People don't experience that happening. But are you saying I'm sort of experiencing this disruption?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it like I would say I experienced a disruption, but the idea of disruption wasn't present to me.
Okay, that I understand that, I think.
Okay.
But I'm noticing a disruption. It's not just that my gaze is going from my dad to the ramen.
Oh.
It's that I feel a disruption as the ramen. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, because I wasn't turning my head. It was coming in. Like it was like going like that. Like if I'm focused on you, it was coming in like that. Like into the noodles came into my visual world.
Right.
Rather than me turning my visual world to noodles. Okay.
So I don't want to make too more of this, but I also don't want to make less of it either.
Okay.
So I can have something enter into my visual world, and I don't feel any disruption. I just feel, there's something rising up in my visual space.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Or I could somehow, as if I was seeing my dad, and now suddenly it's in the physical world, it's rising up, but
I see.
but I feel a disruption as I move from one perception to the next, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That latter statement made more sense. That second statement. Yeah. That's more it. That is more it than the first.
So I do feel something of a disruption of perception as I visually acknowledge the appearance of the Ram.
Yeah. For lack of a better description and a lack of a better way to put into semantics, definitely, yes.
So if you buy that she has frozen her father, that she doesn't actually see her father, that she sees a still picture of her father, then when she gets to go from a still picture of her father to a picture that includes ramen, that would be a disruption. Because the world is frozen,
right,
with her father in it, and now the ramen's in it. What the heck? Where did that come from? Kind of deal. That apparently is what we're talking about here. Something in that ballpark.
Yeah. It's hard. I would say there is something disruptive about this scene, right? There's something that's not. This is not as straightforward. I'm seeing my dad and I'm seeing the ramen. There's something kind of wonky about this. In this interview, I remember it at the time, and still, we've kind of danced around. I can use that metaphor of like, I'm kind of all over of, I don't really know where disruption fits with, I don't know what that means in the context of this experience. There's something there. I don't think it's just a context statement, but I don't quite understand. I don't quite get the...
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think what I said 1 minute ago was sort of trying to put a little ribbon on this, given that you have to leave in 2 minutes. The result of all of our sampling with Amber, that we know that it's not like she's just tracking the real world. She is creating distortions or wrongnesses or creative scenes or whatever you want to call that as she navigates her way through the world, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would also say that it seems that we had the beat where she was erasing the ground, that she was somehow she had to actively the last beep, I think.
Yeah.
Most people, in my experience, say, well, they just zoomed in on the world and the rest of the world goes away.
Right.
People don't have to make it go away. It just goes away. But Amber was saying, I got to make the rest of the world go away. So I got to work at that. And that's interesting.
And that way, and I felt pretty compelled of like, this is not a meta, like, I felt pretty confident leaving that going on. This isn't, like you said, this is not a zooming in. This is a masking, intentionally, mentally erasing other things.
That's what I thought too. And I'm guessing that's related to the feeling of disruption. And I'm not saying I got a theory about that says it has to be this way. I'm just saying these things are in my head in some way related.
Yeah, I'd agree.
6:30.
But I will be running, and I forgot this one. You can definitely cut from the video, but I forgot to bring up. I did watch the Columbo episode that you sent, and I think it connected actually to a lot of what we talked about today. It seems right in terms of like that childlike way of just asking questions. That, I mean, I think the hard part about it, and this is a discussion for another day, I wonder at least if there is some sort of inherent like talent, that comes with just the way you happen to see the world, right? You know, when I watch Columbo, it's like, I don't think you can teach someone how to see the world in that way or ask those types of questions. It's something that, right, you just kind of, that's just how you see it, and that's just how you ask the questions, right?
I don't know the answer to that. That's the $64,000 question for me. I don't know. But I will say, when I was describing myself as saying, well, I was sort of bumbling around and I didn't know what I was talking about here, and I said I didn't know that, I had Columbo in mind while I was talking today.
But that's what I assumed too. And just in this conversation today, especially, reminded me of that. I can imagine that I'm just kind of drawing a lot of parallels, but I'm imagining that's kind of what, right? Like, I can't put into words, but like Columbo is kind of the articulation of what it means to ask the type of questions that you try to ask in DES, for lack of a better word. All right.